Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are tuning in from. My name is Sarah Gerner, and I run the cultural program at Deutsches Haus at NYU, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation, Discourses and Likes, Emancipatory Discourse Gone Viral, with Mohamed Amjahid, Fatma Aydemir, and Ulrich Baer, which we are co-presenting together with the Thomas Mann Haus in Los Angeles. So in the last couple of years, queer feminist, anti-racist, and other emancipatory discourses have become increasingly visible, both in the United States and in the German and European mainstream. And social media platforms have played a vital role in the elevation and circulation of these important conversations, raising awareness about these issues really on a global scale. However, the format of these platforms as these sort of short bursts of information require a kind of translation or condensation of these very complex and nuanced realities to likable, shareable content. And we are so pleased to have with us today Fatma and Mo, who will discuss their personal experiences as traditional long-form journalists and the authors of numerous fiction and nonfiction books on the one hand, and very active content creators on social media channels such as Twitter and Instagram, with thousands and thousands of followers on the other. And we are so happy to have them here to reflect on the impact content culture has had on their work, on the potential advantages and disadvantages they see in online discourse and the participation in online discourse on social media platforms, and perhaps also to just reflect on how participation on these platforms has really changed in the last years. I mean, certainly during the pandemic, I've noticed just shifts on how online discourse is being had. So we really want to get to the conversation. I want to quickly express a few words of thanks to the people and organizations that have made this event possible. Then I'll go on to introduce Mohamed, Fatma, and Uli, and then we'll take it away. So the words of thanks, I would like to say, first and foremost, our thanks goes to the Thomas Mann Haus in LA. This is actually the first time that we're collaborating, and it's been a complete pleasure. I want to particularly thank Nikolai Blauma, who is the program director of the Thomas Mann Haus LA, and also Benno Herz, the project and communication manager. I want to thank the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their continued support of our academic programming, in particular Benedikt Brisch and Michael Tomanek, who spearhead the North American office. And I want to thank our panelists, Fatma, Mohamed, and Uli, for being here today, and for allowing us to eavesdrop on a conversation and their insights into this subject matter. I also want to thank the kind of back end of the event. You can't see us, but we're all here. So it's my colleagues at Deutsches Haus at NYU, that's the director of Deutsches Haus, Juliane, and my colleagues Christian, Zoe, Ali, and Sasha. It Takes a Village, and they all contributed to making this happen. So thank you. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank you, our audience, for being here. We know that everyone has Zoom fatigue. We know that there are, thousands of events that you could be attending. And though we do make all of our content available on YouTube after the fact, it still feels nice to have some people here in this virtual room with us. And we really appreciate you taking the time as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I ask that Fatma, Mohamed, and Uli please turn on your cameras. And I will read radically abbreviated biographical information. We'll post the long form in the chat so you can read up on it. Fatma Aydemir is an author and journalist based in Berlin. Her debut novel, Ellbogen, Elbow, was published in 2017 and is currently being adapted as an upcoming movie. Her latest novel, Jinns, just appeared with Hansa Literaturverlage. And congratulations, Fatma. I know this is a huge deal and I can't wait to read it. Uli was just saying how much he's enjoying it, and I have it and I can't wait to get into it. Mohamed Amjahid is a political journalist, book author, and moderator, and received wide attention for his bestsellers Unter Weißen, Among Whites, and Der Weiße Fleck, Whitewash. Mohamed is currently the 2022 fellow at the Thomas Mann Haus in Los Angeles, and we were just complaining about our weather, how his weather is somehow always better. Ulrich Baer is university professor at New York University, where he teaches literature and photography. His books include Spectral Evidence, The Photography of Trauma, and What Snowflakes Get Right, Free Speech, Equality, and Truth in the University. And Uli also hosts the podcast Think About It, which are these kind of similar to this, like longer form conversations about one of the main topics that these podcasts deal with is free speech. And they also talk about books. So we love this podcast. We highly recommend it. And with this, I will hand things over to Uli's very capable hands. Uli, please take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. First of all, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, who is listening to this. And thank you to Fatma and Mo for joining us today. And to the sponsors who Sarah mentioned. I also would like to acknowledge that I'm in New York City. This is the original homeland of the Lenape people. This is homeland that was violently taken away by settlers. And I want to acknowledge that, not in an empty rhetorical gesture, but because today we're talking about space and spaces where people talk with each other, engage with each other, and that the construction of space is not always just the expansion of something, but it can also mean taking away space from others. And we're talking about the internet, which is also this open space that has a lot to do with power. And I'm really interested that Mo and Fatma, that you're willing and able today to talk to us from Europe and the West Coast of the United States, to talk about how this space of the internet and this digital space shapes your own thinking of how to engage in the world, how to create accountability, how to actually create spaces where people can hear, see, and learn about things that ought to be really disseminated in the proper ways. So you're both journalists as well as authors of fiction. And maybe I'll just give you sort of the opportunity in the moment to start where you want to start. And then I have a few comments or ideas. And as Sarah said, Fatma, I just am completely absorbed in your new novel, Jinns, which I'll recommend and which I hope we can have you with my colleague Amir Eshel from Stanford University on another kind of episode of this kind of talk to talk about the novel. But maybe Fatma, do you want to start? And then Mo, you can come in to sort of think how you've been thinking about this question of how to properly engage in this digital world in the spaces where you are. In German, I guess you say unterwegs, where you're active, right? And thanks for being here.
Well, yeah. I think my relationship to social media, or the way I use it, changes all the time. I started out using Twitter and then Instagram like in a very naive way, not very aware of what I'm doing there actually, despite the fact that I am working as a journalist, I'm an author of books, and somehow I am working with communication, with how people, discuss or how they present themselves. And it took a while to get aware of the ways I actually use the spaces. So as an author, social media, I would say, is more like a tool, as like an author of fiction. I mean, it's more of a tool for me to network with other writers and readers, I would say, and of course also to make my work visible, to promote it, etc. when a new book is coming out. But for my work as a journalist, social media is an important part of my research, I would say. Like it's just one source, but actually it's more important for me to stay up to date somehow on what people are talking about, what they're interested in, what makes them emotional. Yeah, and I guess that's where maybe the danger of it all kind of begins, because like everybody else, I am confined to a bubble where like certain opinions are popular, and to assume that the topics that I see on my social media feed or timeline is um, misleading, because it's not people in general who think that way or talking about this, but people outside my bubble might be dealing with profoundly different issues. So yeah, I think for a time I thought I could prevent being stuck into a bubble by following a lot of other accounts that are politically in a completely different spectrum. I even started following the German right-wing party AfD, like just pre-election, just to see what they're doing. But I just noticed that Twitter doesn't really show me their content because it's not compatible with my algorithm. So it just slowly started to fade out. Yeah, Mohamed is laughing. Yeah, the Twitter knows that I'm not really interested, or I'm not really liking their stuff. So I guess in the end, the best way to really deal with this bubble problem is for me to be aware of the fact that we are all confined in bubbles, and we need to look elsewhere if we want to get a fuller picture what people are talking about and worried about, and what the issues are that are of interest in public. Yeah.
Yeah, I see and feel it like Fatma. I was laughing because sometimes the algorithm really knows you very well, that you are not really emotionally evolved so much, so you would like to see all the time what some Nazis are posting, and sometimes the algorithm doesn't know you at all. So that's also fascinating for me as a journalist, just to watch and observe. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the beginnings of the internet, and I was living in Morocco, and there were like cyber cafes and internet cafes popping up everywhere. And we would go as kids to just have a look to this internet. And back then I had the feeling, okay, I know that internet very well, each corner actually. And of course it got so big that I cannot say the same thing right now, even though at the beginning I was, as a young person, very skeptical towards all these platforms. I never was a member of StudiVZ. That's like a kind of German Facebook. I think it doesn't exist anymore. And then my friends, they had to really push me to get Facebook to stay in touch. And of course, I mean, I just I'm glad that it's a tool to actually communicate with a lot of interesting and dear people everywhere on earth. But quickly, when I began to work professionally as a journalist, it also became a kind of a nightmare to be on all these platforms, on Facebook, later on Twitter, and then very much later on Instagram. I'm pretty new to Instagram somehow, just a few years, and today I would say if I'm there, especially because I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, not for private reasons, because as you said, Uli, it's all about power also, and taking space actually, and agency, and people trying to take agency and space from other underserved communities or vulnerable minorities or certain individuals. And it's sometimes such a toxic space that I needed to learn how to deal with it as a journalist, to use it, like Fatma said, to have a look into what people are thinking, for example, without confusing it with that's my source. As a journalist, like, seeing something on social media is never enough. You always need to do further research. Um, so it's great to have like an overview if you want to quickly just understand what a larger crowd of people think about something, knowing that, especially on German Twitter, there's there are certain people on German Twitter. It's not like representative, but at the same time, it's like it's something that is sometimes very hard to look at, because the amount of racism, queerphobia, and sexism, for example, ableism, is sometimes overwhelming. So I had to learn how to deal with that.
Can I stay for a moment with Mo, what you just said, that you get a kind of a glimpse, you stay on top of Twitter, you sort of look at it, what people are talking about. But of course, you know, as Fatma said, what Twitter is feeding you is what you are generally have been interested in the past, or maybe you've retweeted. If you don't retweet a lot of right-wing things, even in one of your alias accounts, it just won't show up anymore if you're not engaging in the material. And Mo, when you said you get a sense of what's happening, well, you get a sense of what's happening quantitatively, but it becomes more tricky if whether people have enough of a voice or presence to also be heard and not constantly be drowned out again. And I think both of your work, because I follow you on Twitter, is actually to sometimes correct that and say, no, there's another angle on this. There's another way of looking at this. Do not believe this dominant story, dominant meaning the one with the biggest accounts, the most followers, but actually we're both journalists, and I'm kind of want to hone into this. How do you correct this fact that lots and lots of people are going to talk about one thing in one way, because those are the three terms that are used, and how do you counter that?
That was directed at who? Should I?
Either one.
Okay.
Fatma can jump in, isn't it?
So go ahead.
No, just go ahead. No, my answer is like short, because I would say I am like, especially in the last year or last 2 years, I've been I didn't have that much time to really like, you know, make my own content, or I also had a break from the newspaper, so I was not very active as a journalist anyways. But my strategy is more like I'm following a lot of accounts that don't have a lot of followers. A lot of followers compared to like the famous people on Twitter or Instagram, but who have very interesting opinions, a very interesting angle that I am missing. For example, if I'm just sticking to the mainstream news platforms. So I'm retweeting them, and I'm trying to share them and give them like a visibility, yeah, just to share them with my followers. That's my strategy, I would say.
That's important. Just you're amplifying voices by your position in the internet. You're amplifying voices, and I follow your account, and I learned an enormous amount from the people you retweet. I'm not aware whether they're big or small accounts, but since you retweet them, you also, to me, you use your position as a journalist that I assume you've probably vetted this and looked at this and say, that's worth retweeting, pay attention to this. So you're performing a little bit of an editorial function within the vast ocean of Twitter to say, oh, Fatma retweeted this. Okay, I'll read that. That's all, which is really important, because otherwise retweeting, it just means people click on it and then it has countless retweets. But you're actually saying the retweeting can be a small place where you can, what they call curate or be an editor, right?
Of course, because I don't believe, like, I don't have the capacity, like I'm interested in so many things, but I don't have the capacity to have an informed opinion about all of these things. I'm partly there on these platforms to learn things from people that I think they have more knowledge about it and have a different perspective on it. So, and I love being an editor also at the newspaper. So yeah, you could say it's like an editorial work that I do.
And I think sometimes it's very hard for a lot of people, like for me at least, to not say something if you really don't know what to say or you don't have the knowledge. What's happening in Russia and Ukraine is very, very important right now, but I'm not an expert. So I read more than I try to get out there and share my opinion, because it's honestly not that important what I would say to that. And I have therefore a slightly other strategy on On social media, I work as a journalist with investigative methods. So I do like all the spotlight research, trying to get like documents and to talk to whistleblowers, for example, when I do research about police violence in Germany, a huge, big, important topic. And when I am done after a couple of months actually doing this research, and I spoke to the editor and I worked with the editor at any newspaper on the long read. The next step is actually in my head, how do I translate this for social media? Because I would like actually to reach as many people as possible. And I know that you have to translate it for Instagram, for example, or Twitter to be able to talk to these people, because sometimes you scroll and then it's a little bit of luck if you find this content, either someone like Fatma edited and curated it and gave it, handed it over, or you have the luck to have like that good algorithm that will show you that. But also this is sometimes frustrating for me, because I would find myself working a year, for example, to do a research, and it has some how to say, it has an audience actually, but sometimes I would just tweet something very quick between changing the subway, you know, like I have a thought, I would tweet it and it would go viral. I'm like, okay, I you know, this is like somehow also a little bit frustrating. But I just had the situation where a text actually went viral offline because I wrote it for a newspaper network in Germany, in northern Germany, with like they reach 1 million people with subscriptions on paper actually. And the topic didn't work online, but it worked very well offline. So for me, it was also, okay, there are people actually seeing that there's a lot of work and a lot of passion going into a research, and how do I connect with people on Twitter and show them that at least I think this is important and we should have a conversation about that.
Mo, could you say something a little bit more about this process of translation when you're dealing with topics that are socially contested? And since you brought up, which I think for some American listeners, the fact that police brutality is a topic in Germany is not known to them, whereas in this country, this has been driving social conversation for the last 2 years and much, much longer in many other communities. So when I say it's been driving conversation for the last 2 years, that means in mainstream media, people pay attention to it, whereas many other communities have talked about police brutality for literally over 100 years. But how do you translate an issue that is being framed as inherently polarizing? Or you've talked in your contribution to the 55 Voices for the Thomas Mann House about the events at the American Capitol, which part of this country considers a violent attack, and the other part considers a legitimate form of political expression. So how do you, when the translation happens, how do you map it onto what people are willing to listen to?
First, I would say that also for a lot of Germans, the police brutality topic is not that important, unfortunately. And sometimes I'm like also surprised that some people hear about it for the first time, even though we are talking about it like since now 2 years in the mainstream, as you said. But the quick answer is journalism. You know, my work, my journalist work is a mix right now of opinion pieces, especially the column that I write for Taz as a freelance author, and this investigative journalism. And it's, for me, it's amazing and nice to be able twice a month to just write down whatever I think, sometimes funny, sometimes very sad, for example, and just have my opinion and stand against something or highlight something that I think it's important and worth discussing. But when it comes to police brutality, it's just facts, facts, facts. This has nothing to do with my, of course, I have some emotions and I I'm someone who is affected by racism, but I sit down for months and I look at documents, at Excel sheets. I do speak with a lot of whistleblowers, and then I present the facts. And the problem with social media is that some people are resistant, even though they are confronted with facts that you really cannot discuss. You would say, okay, here you have like 10 cases of police brutality, and we actually just we are describing them. We're not putting our opinion on top of it. And people would reply on Twitter with "Blue Lives Matter, go back to your country," whatever, any racist slurs. But that's something I cannot change. The only offer I can make is like, there is this structural problem actually that a lot of people in Germany or outside of Germany, they don't want to acknowledge and see. And the only solution, especially for those who make the political decisions, is to make that journalistic research and translate it so you have the opportunity to get it. And translating this very also complicated and hurtful topic into Instagram, a space which is like nice for if you cooked something nice, or if you bought something nice, if you want to sell something. That's actually a lot of work. How do you do that? And I'm growing while I'm doing it. And sometimes I think even, well, not I think, I know that even those tech companies working in social media, making a lot of money with social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the others, they don't understand how their product work, because it's not only about tech, it's about anthropology and sociology actually, to understand how this crowd comes together sometimes and just decides this is important, and we will share it in thousands and millions, you know. So this is also something that is for me exciting sometimes, to learn about how to use and translate these tools to reach more people.
Just a quick note on what you said, Mo, about people being resistant to facts on social media. I mean, I just thought about it, and it's not really something that's just specific to social media. I think the only thing that's different through social media is that if you would have to rely on media outlets to publish the research you did only, then you might not find anyone to publish it at some point.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, happened a lot or it still happens a lot, but it happened a lot, I think, like 2 decades ago, or a lot more often. And so you always have people who are resistant to facts and who are resistant to certain stories, you know. In the press, you know, they say this story is not big enough, or it's not important enough, which means it's not important for me or the people who have similar realities as me, from the point of the editor. So yeah, once you publish it yourself on social media or make your work visible, it's just normal that you have just an army of this kind of people who are not believing, or who are reacting very aggressively towards it. That's just the thought I had.
Or not having a life, because they are always there. I'm like, do you do something else than just commenting under my tweets, for example? But just if I can add something, it also like this very fast discourse tools on social media, they triggered also this new branch of journalism of fact checking, actually, where I know we have a lot of colleagues. They are just, their job is to pick up misinformation on mostly social media and fact check it, and then like present like the research or the fact check. And It was interesting here in the US, my Twitter is actually showing me a fact-checking box somehow, which is not happening in Germany, I think because Twitter is pouring more money here in the US compared to the German market, which is also very, it's frightening a little bit because, you know, if you understand that you can actually not talk to half of the population with journalism and facts, it also makes you like wonder how is that even affecting my job as a journalist? If you have this resistance where you would say there is a problem, for example, with how the European Union is handling its borders and how deadly that is in the Mediterranean. And a lot of people would say, no, you were just lying. And I would say, but here are the numbers, actually. And they would say, you are paid by the CIA or something very, you know, insane. I would say, I didn't see that money yet, but it's, how can you talk to this half of the population? And my answer is, you cannot, actually. I cannot talk to these people. And it made me feel better and more comfortable. And it's kind of self-care to just let them go.
To not think that you have to reach every person who potentially could glance at your Twitter and convince them. And I want to just go back to Fatma when you said there maybe used to be a time when certain stories weren't published because there were just very few outlets before the invention of broad-based social media, which doesn't necessarily reach everybody, but it reaches more people than probably, you know, sort of old form journalism. So do you think there's an advantage that at least now certain voices can be heard and certain people and groups and communities can speak, and when they didn't have a space because just editors were not that interested, or it didn't sell, or it was actually, I mean, or it was going against the belief system of the publisher. So I'm just curious whether you think there's some potential nonetheless. It sounds like to me there is some potential that at least more people can participate in something like public discourse before we get to all the problems. But I think that was, of course, the great hope that the internet provided, but I still believe there's an advantage that many more people can now at least publish something.
Of course. I mean, I totally believe that. I also see the disadvantages. I mean, it's not like it's not a black or white thing, but it's I think right now we're at a point also through the pandemic that a lot of people get like very dystopic about it, and it's like the worst thing that happened to us is social media, etc., etc. And I think it's important to not forget that a lot of the anti-racist discourse, a lot of the feminist discourse, the queer discourse, the mental health discourse in the last decade are just like happening because of social media. Even the anti-capitalist discourse spread through social media, and it's reaching a more diverse audience, definitely a much younger audience today. Just compared to my teenage years, for example, around the year 2000, I didn't have access to that knowledge because I happened to not be around people who were actually engaged in activist or even academic circles. So from a progressive point of view, it is I think it's great that these concepts and ideas are reaching a wider audiences. But of course, from an intellectual point of view, it can be very frustrating to see how complex theories and issues are not really being like people are not so interested in things when they're not like watered down on a very simple level. The way Mohamed just said it, sometimes you just tweet something just like something funny on your way out and then it gets like viral, but your actual work doesn't get visible on social media, things that you have worked on for months. So that can be very frustrating, I think, but I think the other thing that is being discussed a lot is this the provocation that is somehow happening on social media as well, that everybody's talking in a more aggressive manner, or more like sharper also in a way, or having more somehow it more radical political opinions, or expressing them in a more radical way. And that, for example, I think is actually not something new. The media has always worked with this kind of strategies. The press is always aimed for surprising and controversial takes in order to make sure a lot of people are talking about it and get emotional about it, also, which also made the medium more popular. The thing that changed is that individuals are now claiming this strategy. It's not just something that media outlets do, but everybody's starting to talk like that, and using these strategies in order to express themselves, to provoke people. And I think it's like, you can see it as harmful for our debate culture, but somehow it's not always necessarily a bad thing when society gets more disruptive, I think, because especially when it's about certain issues that are important. For example, in Germany right now, to get more concrete, there is this, so the new government is working on a law, I would say you could translate it into self-determination law. That will make it a lot easier for people to just define their own gender on paper. And so, like, there's a big campaign starting now against this law. Like, there are various media outlets, newspapers, but also like intellectuals who are writing opinion pieces, critical opinion pieces about it, which are actually, you could also call them transphobic hate speech. But there's this debate going on, and I mean, I think it is something that needs to be called out, and I think it's very good that people are that there is an outcry online about that. And I think that social media plays a big role in educating people on this topic, and making them more sensible, and reaching also a mass of young people who are actually informing themselves on these issues, whereas I, as a 14-year-old, had no clue about it. Like, it didn't exist in my daily life, so it didn't exist in my head. So yeah.
Could we stay with this example for a moment, because I think it's happening in the US as well. It's happening in England, and it's kind of interesting what you're saying. Partly there's a generational thing, but also there's the fact that people can actually now push against very empowered people who have access and can write an editorial in one of the leading papers. So you have public intellectuals who can publish something in the equivalent of the Times, which is, I guess, Deutsche FAZ something. And that is no longer the one view, but people can push against that. And in some ways, as you know, as well as I do, in this country, that is framed by a lot of people, including many of my distinguished colleagues. Many of them are white men who are now somehow saying they can't say anything anymore. This is a kind of quote that is actually, I think, a caricature of academia, but it's used, this quote, this cliche, it's used to say people are out of control, they're censoring us, we can't speak anymore. But you described something else. They say, oh, there's now a much broader discourse available to people who previously, and even any 14-year-old today in Germany is not likely to read the FAZ, the equivalent of the Times or the Wall Street Journal. They're actually much more likely to get information. So I'm kind of curious to stay with this of what is happening there. And you said this is ultimately probably important or generative or productive for society to have this very open debate.
Of course, it's a power shift. I mean, it's that what you said. So what you said in the beginning, in the introduction, that there is a power shift. It's not like the power shifts from like you know, big companies, let's say, which media outlets are also, or they're not shifting away, but they're like, wie würde man sagen, sie verteilen sich. They
more disseminated, more widely disseminated, maybe.
Yeah, disseminate over, you know, individuals that are also, you know, organizing in groups somehow in these issues through hashtags, through like certain debates. But I think Mo can also say more about this in power relations terms.
I think sometimes it's very funny. Just this week, I read a complaint of one of these, you know, older white columnists, actually writing about the tonality on social media and how bad it become. I'm like, did you read your own text in your own column? Like, you are actually not holding back, and you were for years before I was born. Actually, you were like doing the same thing just on paper. And that's an amount of fragility that is sometimes very striking, because the fact is also that, of course, journalism, as we discussed earlier, has to fact check social media, content on social media, but the other way around also happens often, that social media or that crowd is fact checking some claims by columnists or scientists, for example, saying that they cannot write and say anything anymore. I'm like, you can actually say whatever you want. There will be a fact check, actually. If you say something transphobic, there will be someone now on social media calling it out and presenting you another reality that you cannot see, because you're like in your own box, actually, not willing to have a look and have a conversation. Actually, that's the problem. A lot of people, they want to talk, but they don't want to have a conversation. And this leads sometimes to very one-dimensional and easy answers. When you see all this turfy feminist discourse or the Blue Lives Matter discourse, when we think about the police brutality problem, the easy answer for people who are like, as far as, okay, we have a problem, actually, they would say, oh, we need just a little bit more diversity within our police forces. And on social media, I would find this claim going viral. Just put like a Black person or a brown person within the police force, and then everything will be fine. But if you would go to the experts doing the research and go to the data, you would understand that the NYPD is actually in some parts a very diverse institution, but still there is a problem with racism and policing in some community, over policing actually in some communities. So again here, the thing is how to translate this knowledge and stay critical and reach as many people as possible without taking so much in consideration that someone will drown in their own tears, actually patriarchal tears or white tears or whatever, to try to not have that conversation, because this now very old Fox News like thing that we cannot say anything anymore. When I am on stage, I'm like, you can say anything what you want. You can be racist actually, but someone will then call you out. That's the only difference between now and 1955.
Can I ask you something about this engaging with really strongly different opinions? And there's a question from the audience. They said, some journalists use this disclaimer, retweets are not endorsements. And the question is, how do you feel about retweeting some antagonistic tweets you disagree with, to comment on them, even if it means they get more exposure?
Mm-hmm. That's a big topic for me, actually. I'm very cautious with retweeting. I'm so happy to follow people like Fatma who are more editing the content. For me, it's like, it's too much work that I have a look, who is this, where is this coming from? So I'm a little bit cautious with retweeting, and I see often actually, not through my algorithm, but through these debates in the in German journalism feuilleton, like the cultural departments of German, bigger German newspapers, I see often very problematic racist, sexist discourses. And the question is actually how to react to that. Do I put it in my column? Do I put a comment and retweet it with a comment? But that means that this one columnist actually again gets a lot of attention with something where I would say this is not worth to have a big audience, because once some people retweet it, then 50,000 more people will read this actually. And some of these people, they don't know that this very problematic author existed in the first place. So for me, actually, sometimes I have to take a deep breath and try to come up with knowledge that is not a reaction to racism, for example. And this is why I'm so happy for authors like Fatma, because I write nonfiction. So I have often to have a look to what's going outside there and describe it and analyze it in the nonfiction text. But I feel like liberated when I read fictional books like Fatma's work, because this is something that is standing for itself. It's like something beautiful, political, that is actually nourishing in another way the thoughts and the conversation. And that is not a reaction to some Harald wrote something in some newspaper and everybody is again freaking out. And I have this conversation with a lot of authors who are very keen and trapped in that system of responding all the time to these provocations. They are in the German, but also in the English-speaking social media world, people who they do not, like progressive people, they do nothing except responding to right-wing media. And I think this can't be this is not enough. This is not enough for me. And it gets boring at some time, because it's a game actually, and we have to get out of it to be able to talk more about ourselves, about the emancipation and the beauty of some texts that we can actually at the end enjoy.
I think, Mo, what you just said, maybe Fatma can come in. I mean, I really think you just kind of said what Fatma does to create a different kind of space. And Toni Morrison quite famously said in the 1980s, racism is a strategy to distract us. It's just a strategy to distract us from doing our work. And she spoke for herself and said, 30 years after you write so many books, people say, oh, and then they say something to just distract you again. That it's very deliberate. So in some ways also responding. And so Fatma, can you say something maybe about this creating a space? And there's a question also, which maybe is related. How do you, the two of you, take a break from social media to sometimes recover from its intensity? Maybe Fatma, you can say a little bit about how you do your creative work, where you probably can't just have all these voices in your head, people tweeting, and you need to, because you have created very, very compelling people on a page. Like Zelda just lives with me now, which is, I really appreciate that.
That's great. Yeah, I take breaks, obviously. Sometimes the breaks are not even like I'm not like fasting for 30 days, not like opening anything, but sometimes it's really just I delete my apps like just for the day, and if I feel like looking at them, I do that in the evening. Like that. I'm taking short breaks, but those short breaks are already enough for me to break that habit of just like checking the whole time what's going on, or did anyone write me or whatever. And that's very important to like get into this and like or achieve the silence that I need in my head also in order to focus on creating something. But I don't really, yeah, as I said, I don't really work with the full distance and not looking at it at all. because especially in the last 2 years, I haven't seen so many people in real life through the pandemic, but having, you know, a little child and working on a novel, everything's very lonely. So it is just a very important tool for communication also for me, not only to see, oh, what are people talking about in news and stuff, but also just like, you know, humor, memes, stuff like that. It's just important to, yeah, to not get like totally lost in this loneliness of writing.
If I can ask the two of you something, there's a question here in your audience which relates maybe a little bit. They say, how could you describe your process? Maybe not, but what kind of tips would you give to young writers of color? Written with O-U-R, which is a British spelling. So, but I'm using this word in a way because I don't even quite know, to be honest, although I grew up in Germany, but I don't know what the language is right now. And I would be curious how this language, writers of color, which would be a way of speaking in America at the current moment. But as you know, those terms are very important and vital and can be very empowering. They're also contested and complicated. And can you maybe say something for an audience, maybe that's not as familiar with the sort of German language media landscape, just because it comes up quite a lot. And I think for also, you know, for a student audience, you know, I teach at New York University, we have a, you know, a wide range of students for whom it really matters who's writing actually, your identities matter. Can you say something about how that maybe plays out for yourselves or in German media where I'm really not, I really am not aware really how that plays out?
So I think that's a very big question, and I think I don't have an answer that fits everybody. But for me, actually, it was very enlightening and interesting to just have a look to who is writing what and where I think I can like have like have an impact to add something to this discourse. And I was, for example, a couple of years ago, that was like 5 or 6 years ago, I noticed that no one or very few colleagues are working on police brutality. And it's part of my reality and the reality of so many people I know. And I was like, okay, that's one project I would like to tackle, and started research. And here we are, 2022, and it's very difficult to have that resistance and say we don't have a problem anymore, at least looking at the facts. So I think it's very, very important to take your vulnerability and your compassion and your what you are interested in and put it in your work. I cannot talk a lot about fictional writing, but for me as a journalist and as a book author, it's very important to be authentic to myself and not trying to please an audience. Of course, it's like this translation to social media, it's like marketing, and I try to reach as many people as possible. But at the same time, I'm like, will I be ashamed in 25 years that I wrote this actually? Or I would sell so many more books if I would write with my first name, Mohamed, something against Islam, you know, in Germany, that would be like a bestseller immediately. Maybe that's plan B if I'm getting very poor, but it's like, it's so frustrating to see that some authors are trying to fit into the market. And if you want to write texts, I think that are good at the end, you have to be honest with yourself in the research, but I think also in the process of writing.
Thank you. Fatma, do you want to think about from your position?
Just, yeah, I can add something. And you can apply it to journalistic or fictional writing. I mean, you can write, but I think the questions, yeah, maybe the more like, how do I publish, or how do I get published? How do I find ways to make this my profession? I would say, so I used to be very afraid and annoyed by the term networking. And it was very hard for me to meet new people. But once I did that, it turned out to be very helpful. So I think it's important to find people, to find allies in the field that you want to work in. These can be authors you look up to and might look like unreachable, but I think still you should always give it a try and contact them in a way, write them emails, talk about your situation. Not only like, yeah, ask for tips, but also maybe, they're always like, it's always good to have this sort of connections, but also to go to events, whether they are, about journalism or like literary events, but just to go there and try to participate in discussions and try to meet new. I really hate the term, and I really was so afraid of that concept, but it's really so much about like meeting the right people, and with right people I mean people who are like not only have some sort of resources but also are motivated actually to share them with you. And if you don't have them around you right now, you might meet them somewhere else. So it's very important to meet people also in the digital space. Of course, I didn't mention it now, but yeah, social media is also important for that, of course.
Fatma, I think for some people that may be interesting, do you really mean you've contacted people, just you wrote to them and said, I'm a writer or I'm interested in your work or something?
No, I just applied to a lot of different newspapers, for example.
Yeah.
Like I started as a journalist, but I applied to so many newspapers for like internships and this and that, and like so many things did not work out. But then at the end, I was doing this unpaid internship, and I met an editor there who was just like so supportive, and yeah, really helped to give me just that little kick that I needed to like actually believe that I could have a chance in doing that work. Um, just, but I also wrote to authors. Yeah, I did that too, but I mean more like I'm very I'm happy to get emails also from young authors. I don't always have like the perfect answer to their questions, but I always try to be somehow helpful and give them at least advice to maybe other people that they should talk to or publishers that they should themselves about. Yeah.
There's another question which I found maybe connects to this a bit. Have you observed changes in your own written language while participating in these larger shifts that we've seen? And sort of how, maybe there's two parts to it. Do you think part of your work is aiming to actually shift some paradigms, to actually find new terms, more inclusive terms, better terms? And how do you think that can be done? And I'm using more inclusive, I think maybe sort of, I hope you know what I'm kind of referring to, but there are ways of referring to just groups, individuals, communities that are not from the position of some kind of institutional power. Do you think your work can do that? And how do you get those terms to have traction in the world?
I would say for sure, language is also something that is changing through times. And you, Ulrich, just mentioned the term people of color. And I am always, while I'm writing in my book, for example, was questioning, is that the right term to use? We need to use some questions, but it's always very important to keep that openness actually to discuss and to change the way we talk so we can like have a better understanding of each other. And sometimes it's better to just name the community, the group that you really want to talk about, to say Black people and not people of color, because you mean a problem that is actually directed or that Black people are most affected by. So it's always, but this is why I'm sometimes puzzled when some, in Germany at least, some institutions or individuals, they are like, oh, we want to talk like in the 80s or in the, I don't know, 40s or whatever. I'm like, we don't talk now, right now, like in the 80s. It should be like a normalized thing that we always speak about which language we use, and if we can, replace some terms, because it's better and more precise to use another term, for example. So I see it, if I look at my first book, my second, and I'm writing right now a lot, so I see that my language also changed. Also, I try to not overcomplicate things. I try to be as precise as possible, and I learn a lot from different communities, actually, especially here in the US, because yes, you have nightmares of tales here in the US. You had Trump, you have like white supremacists, and I always say that whatever happens in Germany happens 6 to 12 months before in the US. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of inspiring to meet with indigenous groups, for example, with Black activists here, and exchange with them, because they made a big effort to think about how to put their feelings, their realities into language, how to pour everything, what they see, what they actually live from day to day, into texts and activism and art. And this is like something that is very important for me as an author.
Fatma, do you want to add something to language use? And I have one specific question, maybe that's useful, and it comes out of real ignorance. And I'm sometimes I don't know what it means when in Germany people use English language terms in order to replace previous terms that are not really inclusive and appropriate. And I think, to me, there's something, this is honestly me just thinking, there's something kind of off about that, because I just happen to know people in Germany who really don't speak English. And so I kind of feel they're now given this kind of burden to learn a term that's an English term that's imported. And then I think, well, that's how language is. You learn a new term. So why am I resisting? But I sometimes wonder, I sometimes wonder whether behind it is also too much of a reliance on academic discourse in America, or certain types of discourse. And I sometimes think, is it really as effective? And then it sounds like, oh, and as you know much better than I do, then it's like, oh, this comes from America. This is American sensitivities or something like that. But you know what I mean when people...
Do you mean, for example, the term people of color?
But I know in the book you co-edited, Eure Heimat, you refer to it, but you refer to it in a very open-ended way. You say, hey, this is one.
Yeah, but it isn't.
You didn't say, learn this and memorize this. You say, this is what Mo also said.
Because it's, how do you say in English, provisorisch?
Like provisional. Yeah.
Provisional. It is provisional. Like, I would say all language is provisional. And this term we wrote the introduction after the texts obviously came. And we noticed that a lot of, like, some authors use the term people of color in the German text, including myself at that time as well. So we wanted to explain it in the introduction to our readership, but the term people of color, but also the concept of whiteness, is so varies with the context. It is also with the geographical context, so it's not actually accurate to assume that it means in Germany the same thing as it means in the United States. So it was important for us to leave it open-ended as well in the book, because anyways, I don't want to go into that detail so much with that term, but in general, I think you're right. It is not very effective to use English term languages that my mother would never, be able to memorize because she doesn't speak English. So, but it is a provisional effort to translate a discourse which is happening in a different country, and not only there. I mean, in so many other but countries in the world. But the English language is just a very common language used in on social media in the activist and academic circles as well. But I would focus even more on activist circles maybe than on academic. And concepts are being, you take a concept, you try to see if it fits to this other country, to this other society. And I don't think, for example, I think it will change. I think we will not use the word. I mean, people are very critical also about the use of people of color in German context, and I understand that. And I think we will not use it for a long time. I think something new will come up, and that's totally okay, because we will get more precise, I think, with time in finding names for the reality we'll live in, which is also shifting all the time.
Can I add something? As often language is also a tool of emancipation. I think a good example is le français verlan, like in the French language, you have a whole new language that was developed in the outskirts of Paris and other French cities by young racialized people living there, especially from North Africa, where they would take the French language and actually destroy it and put it back, and the idea behind it was because the policing was so heavy, they wanted to talk to each other without those white men actually coming from the center of Paris, understanding them. And it became a phenomenon itself, like this Français des banlieues. And it's like a very interesting example that is not really happening in Germany, because in Germany, like, language is it's a kind of a religion, I would argue, and it's very difficult to work with it somehow. But in France, you could see that you have suddenly a whole new space for literature, where people, like, in the center of Paris, started to educate themselves to be able to read a novel, for example, because this novel is so exciting and has new descriptions of realities that are just like a 20 minutes ride far from the center of Paris. And this is why, for me, it's so exciting to come back to social media, to read Black Twitter, Black English Twitter, or queer English Twitter, or queer Arab Twitter, because you have their new, fresh ideas and languages. Sometimes it's like, doesn't make any sense. Sometimes people just like, throw stuff into the social media account, but sometimes it's just like, yeah, it's like a good description of what they live from day to day. And this is why when I want to take a break from German Twitter, the official where the journalists and the politicians are, first I travel and live in Los Angeles, because then I sleep while like they're like talking to each other. But then I really have a look just to other spaces where people exchange and try to create new things which are exciting, and giving me new ideas also as an author.
Mo, next time we'll have you come to New York, where you'll never sleep, and you just
yeah.
other things when they all fight.
Yeah. Yes.
You just used the term queer Twitter, and queer was a slur, and it's one of the instances where an absolute slur was transfigured into a term of pride. It doesn't happen with every term, but it can happen. But I think, Fatma, what you said when I was listening to you, I was thinking, I have a good number of colleagues who are actually really troubled, they claim, by these changes in language. And I just thought about them, and I've sort of thought about them for quite a while. And sometimes I'm just exasperated. And actually, I've interviewed a bunch of students on my podcast, all of whom said, language changes. Don't people know that? And they're 20, not 60. But I thought when you were just talking, those people who have such a hard time that words could be provisional, they don't read fiction. They probably in general don't read fiction and realize that language can create realities as much as describe them. And somehow think it is this kind of one-to-one tool. It's been established as a definition, and God forbid someone would say, oh, it refers to something different. So I like the fact that both of you are right away said it's provisional. We're not locking in a new regime of representation, and that's going to be the terms forever now. Like, it's evolving, because also activism, as you said, really important, changes who groups are and how they are positioned in society. So they need new terms constantly.
Yeah, and when I came as a very young person, as an editor into like bigger German newspapers, I would get like the text of like someone who can be my grandpa actually, and the research would be like good, but the language was like so frustrating for me, because you would start reading the text and you would like sleep actually, and I would try to discuss, can we maybe, it's not about freshening it up, but maybe like, you know, it can be exciting also to tell journalism in a way that is like more, this is actually what I do here in the Thomas Mann House as a research project. It's like I'm trying to figure out how to make everything more entertaining, how to take political discourses or research and important theories, political theories, feminist theories, and try to translate them into texts which are exciting and entertaining. And then from there you can produce movies, series, nonfiction, fiction, etc. That is different possibilities to speak to this bigger audience actually. And I think in Germany we have to work hard on this to be able to be more, you know, alles ein bisschen locker nehmen and not to be too serious about stuff. And to enjoy while writing and while reading, because at the end, reading is such a privilege, a nice thing to do, and to be open to, if you learn a new term, even though you need to go and do the research on the internet, maybe that's a nice thing. Then you learn something.
Fatma, do you want to add anything to this idea whether German language can be energized from within? You've done it. You've already done it. So both of you are doing it. You're in it. So in some ways, Mo, you're saying it has to happen. It's happening. Like, so I think German is also not a very complicated, different way. It's not beyond being rescued from itself.
Yeah. Jawohl.
Yeah. Sorry, I think Mo said everything. I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah, the Jawohl is really, that's what I meant to say. German has a very different legacy and a kind of historical weight from which it is hard to recover. So it's the language of genocide also, and I think it's very hard to recover something, but I think both of your work is actually trying to create something new within that language. So I'm just happy to have you in conversation. It's really, it's nice to, it's not just nice to talk to you, it's just nice to know you exist and you're doing this work, and I presume you're having fun doing it as well. If I may, I just want to point out to our listeners again that Fatma's book, Jins, has just appeared now, and her previous novel, Ellbogen, which won several awards, is out. So you should check this out. It's just a gorgeous book. As I said, we'll try to have you back and just talk about that, if that's okay with you. It's just a very moving portrait of a family, just really deeply moving. I liked all the characters so much. And I don't mean to say it in a dumb way. Like they're actually in my head now. And Mo, his books Among Whites and Whitewash are also available. And so people should also check you out, and maybe you can tell the audience what your Twitter handles are, because we are talking about social media and I want people to follow you. Maybe you can name those as well. And Deutsches Haus will of course do everything to put those in the chat, in the links, but can you just tell the people who may be listening to this on their headphones while they're doing something else, what's your Twitter handles?
I'm writing it's easier. I'm writing it in the chat.
So Fatma is at Fatma_Morgana, right? Yes.
Yeah, and Fatma, people ask me about my friend Fatma Morgana because they think that your last name is Morgana, actually.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I also wrote mine.
No, your handle is it's at _AMJAHID.
Yes, Amjahid.
Yeah.
Amjahid, and then M_Amjahid.
Great. So we'll put those in the chat and in the link to this. And I just want to thank the two of you also for making time. We're sorry we couldn't have you in New York in person. We'll do this next time, but that you joined us from Europe and the West Coast. And I'm also want to thank Deutsches Haus, Thomas Mann Haus, Aurora Haus, the other sponsors, DAD, etc., the German Federal Foreign Office, and especially our audience today. So thank you everybody for listening, and thank you, Sarah. And yeah, it's been great.
Thank you all so much. I really, it was such a fascinating conversation to listen to. And actually, I'm like Fatma, I'm kind of in camp dystopia, but I think now maybe a little bit less, because it really, it was a really good way to reflect on like where we were in the early aughts and how much things have changed, and just how much like this was kind of a revival for me in the, in the democratic potential of these platforms. And so that is indeed hopeful, and also in the ways that we can manifest change, like whether that is in language or in building communities. And so I think you all made really wonderful points. So thank you, Uli, also for the wonderful moderation. And Fatma and Mo, just thank you for being here and for doing the work that you're doing. Like, I think that is also so interesting from the nonfiction and the fiction perspective, and how important both of those realms are in just broadening our horizons and showing us what's possible. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.